Today on Locked On Canadiens, for the love of Saku, can we please outlaw the preseason?
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Locked On Canadiens. As you know, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is Laura Sab, also known as The Active Stick, and I'm joined, as always, by the wonderful Ian Boisvert, also known as Maybe It's Ian. Ian, it is Sunday night. The preseason is mercifully over, and we never want to see it again. How are you doing tonight?
Great. For those reasons and those reasons alone, that's all you really need. As people are listening to this, it is officially week 1 of the NHL season. So we made it. We made it through the summer. The games actually count now. And the schedule ahead for the Canadiens is very daunting. So looking forward to covering all 82 and maybe more this season, but it starts this week. Pretty excited.
Also, I forgot to say that this episode was episode 1155. Somebody asked us in the comments why we number our episodes, and it's really, really simple. A lot of you will watch or listen to this on YouTube, but a lot of you will be listening to this in your car. So if we ever want to refer back to an episode, say there was an interview with somebody or a point we made or something like that, we like to mention the number because it's a lot easier to remember the number than like 7 different things we said to look us up later. So that's why. Anyway, so for those of you listening in the car, or walking your dog, etc., this is episode 1155. All right, real quick, let's get into that Ottawa Senators game. Marty openly said that he was not icing his first line, and he was doing it on purpose because he was worried about injuries, and that the preseason has not been, a very safe place for the Montreal Canadiens to play. But I think that's true of a lot of teams. Drew Doughty, for example, has broken his ankle in a preseason game and is now probably out for the entire season for the Los Angeles Kings.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is I think people took that news as, oh, the Canadiens are running scared from the Ottawa Senators. They're afraid. No, they're afraid of getting a foot caught in a rut. They're afraid of blocking a shot with your hand. They're afraid of a bunch of different ways in hockey you can get hurt other than face punching. And I know people will say, well, you can get hurt in the regular season too. Yeah, I would much rather these guys, if they have to get hurt, have it happen in games that matter. I don't know why that's such a controversial opinion, but it seems like this preseason, like when you mention that, people lose their minds. Well, they could get hurt anywhere, but they didn't get hurt anywhere. They got hurt in a game that meant nothing against players that they will never play against again. So the Senators did the same thing, rightfully so. They sat their top line because the full 82 schedule matters more than these dumb exhibition games that are only here. Really, at least all 6 of them are only here to generate hockey-related revenue for these teams. Because for most of them, we don't see the full lineup. They're not NHL preseason games. They are hockey preseason games.
And it's honestly, I think it's really frustrating too, because this is something where the players were kind of forced to agree to it, right? The players would much rather not do this again. We talked about like how unnecessary rookie games are, because a lot of people brought up the idea of how in the NFL, the star players don't play in the preseason. It's all rookies and tryouts and, just people that you're trying to get more of. And I feel like that is potentially the only real use to a team from the preseason, other than potentially, generating revenue. But why can't you just have that? Why can't you just have this unspoken thing where, not even an unspoken thing, sorry, an official thing, because right now officially the rules are you need a minimum number of full-time NHLers in every preseason game. Doesn't matter what caliber of NHLer they are, they must be a full-time NHLer though. So why can't we change that? And officially you don't need that, and then it's optional, and people who are, let's say, coming back from a season-ending injury last year, they can play. And, we saw with Patrick Laine what happened, but, you give them the choice, and then you use this to showcase your rookies, and you use this for your, preseason tryouts. You see who you're going to add to your roster at the end of the preseason, and also like give players who are veterans the option, right? Like, let's say you're a player and you're a little bit worried about your next contract, or you might be a rental at the deadline, or you're somebody you're trying to showcase. Like, I'm thinking of a guy like maybe Yoel Armia, right? Something like that, where a couple of years ago he was written off. He was in the AHL, he was written off, right? But like a preseason would be a great time for him to be able to make the team. Things like that, like second chances. You make it completely optional for your full-time NHLers, and you play your rookies, and you play those bodies that, you know, you might need to add just to have bodies on the ice.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, I don't know if that's where we're headed, but I think there is appetite to limit the number of games in the preseason. I believe a lot of the insiders have been saying it's going to be brought up to the NHL to potentially limit it to 4 or maybe as little as 3. I'd be cool with either of those.
Because we know
It's
it's not
just,
going away.
yeah, it's not going away. Like I'm not arguing for the preseason to disappear. I'm arguing for the preseason to matter again, because it doesn't. You know, it used to matter because these players would come back out of shape. They would come to their NHL teams full of, you know, beer and potato chips, and they'd have to have it sweated out of them back in the 80s and before that. They don't do that anymore. They're full-time fitness, these guys, all year. So there's really, like, that's not a reason to do these anymore. So they need to limit it. They need to just limit the amount of chances there are for injury, mitigate risk. That's all this is risk mitigation.
And I think, okay, so like, I guess we're going to move the Sens recap to the second segment because I just had to get onto my soapbox and get it all out. But let's talk about the Canadiens preseason overall. 2 wins, 4 losses, not unexpected, better than last year. They had no wins last year. But the power play, aside from a post power play goal scored by Oliver Kapanen, who we will get into in the second segment, gave us no hope. 6 games, 0 hope.
Yeah, it was bad. And it was bad for the same reasons it was bad last year. The drop pass against the Senators cost them a goal.
Mm-hmm.
The Senators saw that coming, just as every Montreal Canadiens fan watching that game saw that play happening. They skated up to the blue line. Joshua Waugh said, well, we always drop it back. And he sent it back to Alex Newhook, who was then pressured, and he immediately gave up the puck. I'm not so upset with the result. 0 for 30 is obviously embarrassing, but the number 1 power play unit wasn't out there for most of the time. So give them the benefit of the doubt there. But the problem is the way they played was the same.
Right.
So when you plug in that first unit on Wednesday against Toronto, they're going to be doing the same thing. And I have very limited optimism that it will result in anything other than what we've seen so far. They're doing the same thing and expecting different results. I know Kirby Dach is there. It changes things on that power play.
They put Angstrom on instead of Matheson in the last game.
Yeah.
He looked
Anybody
okay.
but Hudson, apparently. You know, which I understand.
He looked okay, but
Yeah.
like the same thing was happening, right? Like the same issue was happening. Doesn't matter who you put back there.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the song and dance for this team's special teams for a while. And again, it's something I've harped on and will continue to harp on because until it continues to be, you know, until it's false, because it hasn't been yet. You win games at 5-on-5 and lose them in special teams. They keep losing them on special teams. They keep letting, like Ottawa, the first game they played against Ottawa, they had nothing going until that major power play, and Montreal gave up 3 goals. You just can't do it. It cannot happen. So, you know, the new season coming, right? It's a blank slate for everybody. Everybody gets a chance to start fresh. I'm going to go into Wednesday, you know, bushy-tailed and doe-eyed and try to believe that this team will have a competent power play. But man, nothing they did in the preseason makes me think that's a reality for them.
I know. All right, to sum up real quick, if there's any one lesson that we can take, a positive lesson that we can take from the preseason, what would it be?
Well, I think Oliver Kapanen said it himself, that the Canadiens aren't going to get pushed around. We can argue with the results of that. We can argue with the way that they, you know,
Go about
capitalized on that, right? The execution of it. But the result is the Canadiens refuse to be pushed around. So if you're going to take one thing away from the preseason, that's what I'm taking.
Yes, absolutely. All right. In our next segment, we will talk about specifically about that game. And then later on, we'll talk about how the Canadiens get under the cap and who stays and who goes before the season opens. And that's coming up in just one moment. This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your one-stop shop. It's a hiring platform that honestly, it makes everything so much easier. You can use it for scheduling, screening, and messaging, and you can connect with quality candidates faster. One of the things that I love about Indeed is that it makes everything so easy. Everything's just all in one place. You don't have to keep track of all kinds of communication channels. You just find your quality candidates faster. You match with them. And I promise you, if you need to hire, you need Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, so we want to talk about that Sens game, and I would say that since nobody left the game with a season-ending injury, I feel like it was a positive. And I do like we are gonna have to talk about Arbor Jacki in a second, but I want to point out a couple of things. Like I thought Adam Angstrom had a great game, and I felt that he did a lot to solidify his position to stay here. But I don't know if that's the choice the Canadiens are going to make. We are going to talk about that in the next segment, but I was impressed with his play in that game. On the Ottawa side, I thought like it was pretty much a Shane Pinto show. And I thought that the officials may be a little bit overzealous, but better than losing control of the game. Like I felt that they were very quick to call everything. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that, but I certainly agree with that more than that game against Toronto or the previous game against Ottawa, where they allowed everything to unravel and just completely lost control minutes into the game.
Yeah, this was sort of a game management, moment for the officials. They knew the assignment going into there. I did think, like, I completely agreed on Angstrom. I thought he was excellent, and I wish they had one more preseason game just so I could see him, but that's the only other reason, and never have another one ever again. I thought Joshua Wash struggled. Coughed up a couple of pucks that ended up in the back of the Canadiens' net, which is really unfortunate for him because Kapanen and Heineman had good games, so it sort of puts him back on the bubble, which is not a place I thought he would be in. He had a great camp otherwise, but that was sort of, we can only deal with the games that are played in front of us, and that was played in front of us, and it wasn't great for him. But Heineman looked great. Obviously, and we can talk about this, I guess, now. Arbor Jacki had a great bounce back game. He started off with something that I talked about wanting him to do in the last episode, which is instead of being the aggressor, having guys come to him, he pushed a Senator down, knocked him over at center ice. He kind of awkwardly fell into another Montreal Canadien. Was it McEwen? McEwen took exception to that and
Zach
jumped
McEwen,
Zach McEwen and went after Jacki. And Jacki not only handled him in the fight, but then drew a power play for the Montreal Canadiens. So that, to me, like, if Jacki has to fight and he's doing it that way, great. Perfect.
Ian, why do you hate Arbor Jacki?
Again, man, like, it's wild. It's wild to be in the that I want to see more of him. And by getting tossed out of games, I see less of him. It's math. It's 1 and 0. One is bigger than 0. I'd rather get 1.
I know.
Yeah. So he had a great goal. I mean, he's always had a really heavy shot. So it was nice to see him put one into the back of the net.
Yes. And that was coming off of a power play. Like it was like moments after a power play ended, but it was not a power play goal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because we can't have those. Actually, it violates the CBA. You should read into it.
No power play goals for Montreal. That's something we agreed to. I'm going to start writing to Valérie Plante about it. But okay. So I also felt that Christian Dvorak had a good game, but I don't know if it's because my standards are low or if I was just watching a different game. And also, spoiler alert, not spoiler alert, full disclosure, I did fall asleep during the game, and then I had to watch the replay like late at night. So all of my
You are forgiven for falling asleep during a preseason game in which none of the regular NHLers are playing.
I think the thing is like you can't lie down on the couch because as soon as you do that,
It's
your
over.
eyes are not staying open. It's over. Either way, so I watched it pretty late last night. You know when RDS replays it at like 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever. So it was pretty late, but like my observation was Christian Dvorak played much better than I expected him to in that game.
See, I was watching him and I was, he was driving me nuts before he scored. He took another penalty. I think it was him and Pizzetta put the Canadiens down on 5-on-3 in which they got scored on. So again, regular NHLers cannot be doing that to this team, right? I can deal with the rookies taking penalties in these games, but Dvorak has taken a couple of dumb penalties this preseason. But I found that like other than the goal, watching him play, he was driving me insane. I don't know what it was. Maybe I'm just looking at him too critically, but he
I
scored the
don't know.
goal and I was like, "Oh, cool, he scored." And then I looked down at my notes and like, I haven't noticed him at all. And when I have, he's taking penalties or like just barely skating. The Amadio goal, he the defense he was playing was fraudulent. He was
Yes.
not doing any. He just let Amadio go right to the front of the net to deflect that puck. I was like, where are you going? Like, why are you not covering this guy who's just walking to the front of the net undetected to deflect the puck past Montemo? Like, I don't know. He drives me nuts. I feel like that's going to be a story this season, is him driving
Yeah.
me nuts.
Well, I'm also excited that like we have something to disagree about. We can't agree
Yeah.
on everything. But yeah, so that was one of my observations, and I wonder if it's because you were looking for like like confirmation that like he doesn't belong on this team, and I was looking at it and like we're stuck with him. So like let's try and find some positives.
Yeah.
I also felt really bad for Josh Anderson. Tried, failed, but tried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder, and maybe this is me being a little too harsh, but there were a couple shots, I forget what period, maybe the second or third period,
I
where,
want to say it was like middle of the game,
yeah, he got two shots
unencumbered.
uninterrupted in front of the net. I don't think he hit the net either time.
No, he missed. He
He
definitely
missed
missed.
both. My tinfoil hat theory is that the senator said, "You don't got to put anybody on him." Because why was he that wide open in the center of the ice? There shouldn't be any reason any player gets that much space and time in the NHL.
They're just messing with us now.
They have to be. Like, I watched that and okay, wow, they let him do it once. Well, they probably won't miss him again. And then like 20 seconds later, he's right back in the same spot taking the same shot. I missed both of them. Like, I don't know, do they practice shooting? I wonder, because like it seems like he gets a lot of these opportunities and he hits glass more than anything else.
I saw a comment. I want to say it was like in the Eyes on the Prize thread, or it was on Reddit. I don't know. I was looking through it, and someone said like maybe it's his stick, like maybe it's like the
Yeah.
wrong weight, and like maybe it's like just wrong for him, and he needs to like buy new sticks and get a new contract or whatever. But like that, I found that really funny, because it's impossible that nobody was harassing him and he misses like that way. Like there's absolutely no pressure on him at all.
Yeah.
Like nobody was in his way. Nobody
Yeah.
was like even pursuing him essentially. Like it was like they were just like leisurely watching. How funny would it have been if like he had scored?
Yeah, it would have been really, really funny. I think he's saving. The first game against Toronto is usually the annual Josh Anderson game. So, I mean,
Maybe
I
he was
think,
he was faking it so that like Toronto scouting adjusts for that.
yeah, yeah. Don't even bother going after that guy, and he's gonna go, sicko mode on the the Leafs on Wednesday night.
I
That's
really hope so.
certainly one outcome. I don't know if it's a very common one, but it is something that could happen.
Um, I can't remember what else I wanted to bring up for today. Like, was there anyone else that stood out to you, either good or bad?
We talked about Angstrom. Uh, I forget what goal it was. I think it was the Dvorak goal where he made a really smart pass
Yes.
across the blue line as these guys were entering the zone, which is a pass that NHL veterans don't make with particular accuracy, and he made it look really easy. Yeah, I really like that player. I think he's Laval bound, obviously,
Yeah.
but that's a really good call up in the case that you lose a left shot defenseman and you want a guy to sit up in the press box and be an extra or potentially get into a game. Adam Angstrom, I have no issues with him, stepping in a limited capacity this year, just seeing what we have there. Really
Yeah.
exciting player who I didn't know much about coming into this camp.
And I think, there was another game in this preseason that we both talked about his zone entries and how good they are. And
Mhm.
to do that, in motion on the fly like that was really, really cool to see. And it resulted in a goal. So I feel like, he's somebody who's definitely really good at that aspect of it. But I also overall, I know we have to move on to our next segment. I felt that the zone exits overall in Montreal can be much cleaner. I think they're
Yeah,
struggling on that front.
agreed.
I feel like they're better than before, where they would just dump the puck every time. They're not doing that or ice the puck. They are actively thinking about it. They're just not executing to completion.
Yeah, and I think a game that has Lane Hudson and Mike Matheson in that will improve this team's ability to do that very
Yeah,
quickly. So
absolutely.
we'll get a chance to see that on Wednesday against Toronto.
That's the hope. I don't know what the Canadians will decide, but I'm pretty sure both of those players will be playing in that game. All right, so in our last segment, we're going to talk about who the Canadians have to kind of whittle down their roster before, I think it is 24 hours before, right? They have to have their rosters
Mhm.
in by 5 p.m. on Tuesday for the Wednesday game, right?
Mhm.
So we're going to talk about that in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. You hear us talk about FanDuel a lot because it is America's #1 sportsbook for a reason. Everything is so easy to use, and it's like a one-stop shop. Especially right now with the NFL season that has just started, you can get a big return on FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You heard me right. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Visit fanduel.com to get started. That's fanduel.com. Okay, so the Canadians are currently, I think, $2 million over the cap, and they need to get compliant before opening night. I believe that it needs to be the day before, right?
Mhm.
The rosters are due at Central Registry 5 p.m. the day before, and they have to be cap compliant by then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that the Canadians will need to make another move to make that happen. And by another move, I mean a trade or potentially waiving somebody that, has an NHL contract and an NHL caliber cap hit. But it is still interesting. Remember Raphael Harvey Pinard is on, well, he's IR eligible. He's out for a while. He makes 1.1, I believe. I think there's a reality where the Canadians can get cap compliant just by putting Harvey Pinard on IR and then potentially papering Arbor down to Laval to get that cap hit under for 5 p.m. and then call him up the day after, which I believe is entirely possible, because then the Canadians will have put Carey Price and Patrick Laine on in-season IR, which is different than off-season long-term injured reserve. You actually get to save cap, if I've understood that correctly. So there are ways for them to do that, but it does mean that the Canadians have had some players push them to make decisions about their roster positioning, right? Like the biggest one on my list is Oliver Kapanen, who
What happens
we
to him?
right, we all expected that he would come over here and, have a decent camp and probably just end up going back to Sweden, but he did pretty well to the point where he's at least knocked on the door for one of those extra forward spots right now. The way I have it, you know, they can roster a team with all three of Kapanen, Pezzetta, and Waugh. Whether or not they want to is another question. I think maybe they have to send one of those down or waive one of those guys. And I think if they waive Pezzetta, he'll probably get claimed, honestly. But out of those three, let's say it's Heineman, uh, Kapanen, and Pezzetta. You can keep. Let's say you can keep two of them.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's obvious that you keep those two and you waive Pezzetta, but I don't know if that's reasonable.
I think, honestly, I don't know that I would pick Heineman over Pizzetta at this point.
Hmm.
Um, And I think that just means that I didn't see in him what a lot of other people saw in him. I think Heineman is a very valuable player for Laval, 100%. I just don't see him as a full-time NHLer. Whereas with Kapanen, I do see him as a full-time NHLer. And with Pizzetta, I mean, he's been that for the last 3 years. Right. So, that's where I stand. And I understand that Heineman has more of a ceiling. I haven't seen him trending upwards in the past year, though. And that's the thing that concerns me. Whereas like with Kapanen, I'm like absolutely 100%. And then with Pizzetta, this is the kind of year where the Canadiens need a Pizzetta, right? I feel like they might not need him in 2 years from now when they're like actually actively in the playoffs and like beating worlds because they have guys like him. But I think right now, Pizzetta is a valuable commodity. Whereas like I feel like if they lose Heineman, it's like, oh, well, it feels like they lost Tyler Toffoli for nothing at the end. But if they lose Heineman, I'm not too bothered by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I just realized I forgot entirely about Barré-Boulet, who I thought had a really decent camp and probably warrants a longer look here because I do believe he would also need waivers to go down to Laval. And I don't know that his camp warrants him being played in Laval. I think he's a perfect fourth line option for this team. So there are decisions to be made, and it's just whether or not the Canadiens value having Kapanen over here more than, the potential of losing a Pizzetta on waivers, or if they would rather say, we want to keep Pizzetta here for now, Kapanen back to Sweden with you for another year. We'll see you in a year when he's probably, straight up just an NHL player at that point. We don't have to have this conversation next camp.
That's where I'm leaning. Like, that's where I think they'll lean, just because he's going to get more minutes in the SHL.
Yeah, I think so too. And to just, again, develop out of the spotlight. There's been a lot of eyeballs on him in this camp, which I don't know that was necessarily expected, at least for me. I know one of the first preseason camp games where they, the inter squad scrimmages or whatever, he really stood out. And from that point on, it's been all eyes on Oliver Kapanen, which is great. It's really cool to have a player show up over here, make some noise in the preseason, make us think he's going to make the team, maybe warrant making the team, and still say, you know what? It would probably just be better for you to go back to Sweden for the year. And I think that's why, like, if you look at Kapanen's camp, it's a job well done. Like, if he goes back to Sweden, he should not do it with his head down.
Right.
He earned, a lot of respect in his run over here, and I think it's going to create space for him in the future.
Yes, absolutely. And Ian, I think it's time for trivia now.
It is. Let's revisit Friday's question. Remember, name this player. Minnesota, Montreal, Boston, Tampa, New York Rangers, Edmonton Oilers, Buffalo Sabres. I do have a listener who got this, but I will give you the victory lap here first, Laura, and then I'll get to our listener email because I think it's pretty interesting.
Well, I did give you the answer, but I cheated on this one. It was Benoit Pouliot, but I checked it before I asked you. I was like, I had checked it on, I can't remember. I went to his page or whatever. And then I was like, yeah, that's the guy that Ian was talking about.
And thanks to Nolan Beauregard Jackson, who wrote in for the Friday trivia. It's Ben Pouliot. I met him at a golf range in Île-Perrot, just off the island. Super cool and down-to-earth guy. And he even follows and likes my posts on Instagram. My buddy was shooting photography, and he let us shoot his Aston Martin. So I got to chat with him for about 20 minutes. Great guy. And he included a picture of his very cool car, and it's a very cool photo as well. So thanks for sending that. I'm glad to hear that Benoit Pouliot was nice to you, because I don't like hearing when these players are mean to people away from the ice. So Benoit Pouliot, friend of the show.
Really nice too.
Yeah, friend of the show, Benoit Pouliot. There you go. All right, you ready for the next question?
I'm ready for the next question.
All right, same path. Follow the player. Chicago, Calgary, Montreal, Anaheim, Columbus, Colorado. Chicago, Calgary, Montreal, Anaheim, Columbus, Colorado. That's your guy. Good luck.
All right. And if you know the answer, you can send it to us via email, lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. You can send it to us on Instagram, lockedoncanadiens on Instagram. On Twitter, we're at LO_Canadiens. You can DM or reply. And a bunch of you have been leaving it in the YouTube comments. We are more than happy to get them. Any format, and we will shout out whoever gets the answer first. At the same time, that's also where you can send all your mailbag questions. Please, please, please do send us your, we love getting mail and your experiences with players, any thoughts you might have, mailbag questions, as well. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcast as well as on YouTube. We're free and available every single day. And this is going to be a really interesting season for the Montreal Canadiens, starting with the game on Wednesday night. So we'll have our preview coming up as well. So make sure you're tuned in, tell your friends, subscribe, like, rate, and we will see you all tomorrow.